We're at risk of having boards be the slowest room in a really fast world.
This conversation is about the hidden frictions of the AI era and what it will take to close the gap between technology and the system that govern it.
I think experiential learning is the only way to actually develop AI judgments.
We have this paradox where AI makes people more efficient, but it seems that it's probably less trusted.
You can plug holes, but until you build the muscle and the framing and the vision, we're always going to be behind on technology, no matter how many tools we're throwing into the system.
Right now, something subtle but important is changing in the boardroom. Not in how often boards meet, and not necessarily in how they review the financials, but in the questions that they are starting to ask. I am Diana Daniels. I am a Mexican entrepreneur based in Barcelona, building companies at the intersection of telecom, blockchain, and AI. And I've spent my career in connecting systems, cultures, and people across borders, like many of you. I'm not just building for today, I'm also building for what is next. In the past year, investors have begun asking boards not just what AI tools their companies are using, but how they are governing them, how decisions influenced by AI are being overseen, how risks are being understood, how strategy is changing because intelligence itself is changing. And that shift is happening at the same time and another one. Because today, nearly 9 out of 10 organizations are already using AI in some form, but only 7% are using it in a way that actually shapes decision-making strategy. So on paper, we are in the middle of an AI transformation, but in practice, most organizations are still operating with systems and governance structures that were never designed for it. And that's where things start to get very interesting. Because inside organizations, we are seeing a new kind of friction emerge. When people know work is AI assisted, they often read the person behind as a less competent. This is striking. And what that does is that it's a penalty that is twice as high for women and especially for older leaders. So we are entering a moment where intelligence is scaling, but trust is becoming more fragile, and leadership and systems are failing to sync in with reality. And that's why this matters right now, because this is no longer just a question of adoption. It's a question of governance, of legitimacy, of how decisions are made and who is accountable for them. And lastly, because whether our boards or our leaders are ready for systems we're building. And to explore that, I'm joined today by Alethea Hannemann. She's the co-founder and CEO of Board.Dev, a community advanced technology and governance in the nonprofit sector. They are helping tech leaders to get a seat in the boards of nonprofits. Alethea is someone that is working at the intersection of AI leadership and board-level decision-making. And this conversation is about the hidden frictions of the AI era and what it will take to close the gap between technology and the system that govern it. Let's dip into it. Alethea, thank you. Thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate your time and expertise to be shared with our audience. Thank you.
I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation. So thanks for having me.
And when I was actually getting prepared to talk today with you, I was reading some of your posts and also was reading about what you and Board.Dev were doing. And I found something very interesting that stood out for me, which is that tension that you highlight where AI adoption is widespread. Very few organizations are actually using it in a way that changes how they think, either decide or operate. And you actually referred to data that is coming from McKinsey and EY, where they show that while around 92% of the organizations are using AI, only 7% are doing it strategically. So for me, there is this sense that we're moving very fast, but not moving deeply. So for what you're seeing today, what is actually happening inside organizations right now?
I think, you characterized it well by saying we're moving fast, but not necessarily going deep. I think there's a lot of activity and less meaning. And to some degree that's okay right now. We want a lot of experimentation, but if you want to be getting the benefits of that experimentation, you need to figure out a way to solidify, to scale, to really institutionalize what you're learning across the organization. And one of the ways you can do that is by, aligning your leadership team, including your board, around what you're trying to do and how you can do it. So we're coming out with some research from Dell in partnership with TechSoup in about a month. And what we found was, a board is not necessarily critical to kicking off AI initiatives within an organization. And in fact, probably shouldn't be doing that. But boards are critical to making something sustainable and durable because boards are where accountability lives. Boards are where budgets are ultimately approved. Boards are where strategy and vision are really kept. And if, AI is not being incorporated at that level, then whatever you do is necessarily going to be more surface. It's not going to be values aligned. It's not going to be, incorporated throughout the mission's core purpose. So that's some of what we're seeing right now. Everybody's into AI, which is fantastic, but how do we make it something that, really transforms and moves an organization is the key question at the moment.
And do you think that there is a gap in between what leadership is living inside of the organization through AI versus what is happening inside of the board on that acceleration of or adoption?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things that I'd name there. Number one in general, the work that we do is to help boards be more future facing, be more, be more now, be more what organizations need now. And sometimes we say that, particularly on the nonprofit side, we're at risk of having boards be the slowest room in a really fast world.
Mm.
And that's because, we're not necessarily bringing them along. We're used to giving them a pretty PDF or a pretty PowerPoint that talks about, challenges that started 6 months ago that we solved 3 months ago, but we're not talking about now, and the future facing and nonprofit executive directors in particular are quite reasonably sometimes nervous about bringing their boards into, the messy middle or the messy now. So right now, when, as you know, AI adoption is making everything quite messy, that's
Yeah.
in good ways and bad, that's a real challenge for boards. Another issue, I'd say the second biggest issue is that many folks who are serving on nonprofit boards or otherwise are not, they're not in tune with technology in the way that they need to be, or they haven't talked about technology in the context of this particular organization that they're leading. And so when, if you don't have that as part of the conversation, it's going to be really difficult for you to be relevant and for you to feel what's relevant for the organization as well.
This is very interesting because I believe that it's not only about like falling behind on what is happening on the tech side, but it's also on the leadership side of the organization, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. And we always say that, I work, we work with a lot of foundations who are thinking about how to accelerate their portfolios.
Mm.
And product is super important and
Yeah.
cash is super important.
Yeah.
Those two things, like nothing can happen without that. I'm so grateful to know that so many foundations are starting to fund technology, that so many tech companies are, have renewed interest in getting their products out in the market. But neither of those stick if you don't have the leadership models that really help you put those into use. One of the reasons that we partner with so many companies on getting their people on boards is because they know that the product and the cash will only go so far unless the organization has the kind of leadership muscle to push that through. And I'll give you an example. One foundation that we spoke to recently said they had offered their portfolio a very large unrestricted grant for the next year. They said, I believe it was, up to 5% of the organization's operating budget for the year, which is a pretty big chunk.
Yeah.
Up to 5% of the organization's operating budget for a year, if they could talk about a technology need or initiative that they wanted to take on. And this was not a big, long grant application. This was not a government style application. It was, this person I was speaking to said in some cases we took a paragraph, like just tell me in a paragraph. And something like 70% of the organizations could not do this. They couldn't talk about a specific technology need or how it fit into their overall strategic plan. And so, this person working at the foundation, his team said, oh, wow, this is a great opportunity. Let's bring in some strategy, some tech consultants to come in and help build a tech strategy for each of these orgs. And then we'll figure out what they need to do. And then we'll get them this money and it's going to be amazing, which is the right impulse. But this leader said, well, that's great. But if we do that, then in 3 months, they're going to have different needs and they still won't have the leadership muscle to have created this. They still won't have the board that knows how to help them foresee their technology needs and what matters in the future. So I loved that thinking. Like that just says right there, like we can plug holes, but until you build the muscle and the framing and the vision, we're always going to be behind on technology, no matter how many tools we're throwing into the system.
You see, I do love this because I'm sitting also in a board of a nonprofit organization, and we're always thinking in ways of how to empower the people with the technology, and we've been building also some of those products that can give us some cash to the organization.
Yes.
And I see this kind of like the constant model. We in the SCP Foundation in Stanford, we also found nonprofit leaders to come to Stanford with our program for a year, and I see this transformation happening in most of the nonprofit organizations. How do they produce the products that can help them bring also cash that will alleviate those problems
Yes.
of revenue? And I believe that AI is bringing already a major differentiator for those companies. So I wonder in the previous conversation we have, like 7% of the organizations are only using it strategically,
Yeah.
AI. What do you think is the differentiator that they do? How are they using it that good that maybe the
Yeah.
other ones that are not, that maybe are watching us today, can say, oh, this is something that I need to do?
Yeah. Well, and I think so I think about this in a lot of different ways because to some degree right now there is, you mentioned AI is a major differentiator, and there is a group of organizations that is kind of pulling ahead. They're reimagining their entire business model. They have made good friends with some very powerful funders who are really interested in AI. And I heard someone describe it the other day as, he feels like it's splitting into the cool kids and the not cool kids. And he was sort of laughing at this and ruining it. He is in the cool kids group, but he's worrying about everyone else. And I worry about that too, right? I want to make sure that the 99.5% of nonprofit organizations who maybe are not in that cool kid group yet, like we figure out how to bring them along. So I do think about this a lot. One colleague I have, he works in an organization called, or he runs an organization called Tech to the Rescue, which connects a lot of tech agencies to nonprofit organizations globally, and has been doing this for a while. They've just gone all in on AI, and he refers to it as AI sprinkled. Those folks who are kind of experimenting and not really moving forward. And something that's more AI native doesn't necessarily mean that they were built around AI, but they're evolving to think about, how can you really reposition what you do in a revolutionary way? Like, let's reinvent the thing, not just how you do the thing.
Yeah.
And that involves, so, a few things. that involves. Number one, it's a huge challenge, right? So that's one of the reasons that it's so important to have boards involved, because boards are really unique in their ability to press the organization to think differently. A nonprofit CEO or executive director is in many ways conditioned to preserve that organization in the condition it is now. You fight every day for funding and for resources and for stability to keep that organization doing what it is doing today. And so it's very difficult for a CEO to reinvent. And a board can kind of, help, raise the altitude and open the aperture and say, okay, what is it that we should be doing really, really differently, in order to really leverage the power of AI?
And one of the most striking signals that you've shared also comes from that research that you highlighted from HBR, that when people know that the work is AI assisted, they tend to rate the creator as less competent. When I read
Oh,
that, it was like, what?
yeah,
And
that one hurt.
what I guess it was more concerning is that penalty is twice as high for women and or older leaders, because what I
Yeah,
believe that is very interesting on that share that you did is very significant, because in sectors like the nonprofits, that's where there's a large share of leadership that is female. So when we have this paradox where AI makes people more efficient, but it
yeah,
seems that it's probably less trusted, why is
yeah.
that happening? Why are we reacting to when we see the AI assisted work might not be then like we what is going on?
Yeah, that one was really painful for me to read too, frankly. As a woman and as someone who is advocating constantly for, women to be in positions of leadership in technology and developing it and using it. But also it rings true, in many ways. So I think I think there's a couple things. One is you say, what does it mean when AI is less trusted? And I actually think in this instance, it's not necessarily AI, it's the individual who is less
Yeah.
trusted, right? The tool is fine. It's who is using it and how. And I think this operates on two levels. One is the individual level. And so, if we're conditioned if there was a challenge already, in perceiving women leaders as, powerful and competent, then AI is going to exacerbate it. That's kind of what AI is doing everywhere, right? AI is amplifying, or a mirror for things that we saw that we saw in the world anyways. This one is really interesting because, as you note, the vast majority of workers in the nonprofit sector in particular are women. 75% of workers in the nonprofit sector are women. So, one thing that we recommended that you do is really be upfront about your AI policy and norms and say, across our organization, we use AI to create things, but everything is always human vetted, to celebrate those stories when people do use AI, and make sure that we're being really visible. This is important on the culture level and for individuals, but I believe it's also important on the organizational level for the way an organization communicates with and presents itself to the world. Because I think, what we might, and I don't have any data points on this, this is mainly anecdotal, but at the moment, but uh, funders are really struggling with how they encourage AI use in their grantees for, say, writing grants. It is my guess that there is kind of the same competence penalty for organizations that are using AI to, get their grant in front of you. And so being upfront and saying, we use AI in this way, everything is, AI assisted, but human generated and human vetted, is one way that we can start to maybe
To
set those
trust it.
norms. Yeah.
What I love here is maybe your feedback on how does that impact the board, right? Because should boards understand about this legitimacy challenge, especially when evaluating this leadership as well, no?
Yes, absolutely. So boards should know, first of all, what's coming to them from the organization.
Yes.
What's been AI generated? How did we use this? I mean, the more we talk about the how, I think the better. I hear from a lot of folks that one of their challenges in enabling AI in the nonprofit sector is use cases. We don't have enough ideas about where to use this and where it's useful, and organizations are developing everything in silos, and so therefore we're not learning what's possible as fast as we need to be. And I think that's really important. But I was just on a panel yesterday where we did, not only some great use cases, but some kind of down and dirty on the how. And I think understanding the how is also going to be helpful with folks to see where they started and had a halt, to see where maybe their vision outpaced their staff's ability to do something, to understand what it means when, you've got an engineering team that can suddenly do in a month what your roadmap was in 18 months. And to see those sticky points, I think is really going to be helpful for folks to expose not just, what you can get done, but how important, how you're working through the challenges in order to get there. And then we can start to normalize what it looks like, what the governance level is, and so on. And so I mentioned that because boards are often kept out of that dirty how.
Yeah.
And seeing more of that is going to be important. Boards also need to see that, not every AI effort is going to be immediately fruitful. Something else that we've talked about is, this concept called the J curve, where when you take on AI, typically your productivity is going to dip for a while before it starts to climb again. And, if boards are only getting a snapshot of performance, you might be at risk of losing them at the low point when they don't get that it's about to go up. So seeing that messy middle, I think, is really critical for them.
It's interesting because we at least on my experience with boards, especially nonprofit boards, is that we need to allow the chance for that innovation. And when I was reading your pieces, something that struck me or that it worried me is that what is happening inside of the organizations where maybe when people are encouraged to use the AI, but it also might be penalized for using it as well, right? So it's how do
Yeah.
we basically surpass that piece? Are we maybe unintentionally slowing down on that very transformation that we're trying to accelerate? And then the biggest question that I have for you is that how do you think that that can actually impact innovation?
Oof, the perception of, how we're using AI. Yeah. I mean, I think just to back up a little bit, there's the competence penalty that we've been discussing, but then there are legitimate concerns from many nonprofit leaders and staffers around the ethics of using AI for particular things. So, and these tend to be, these are real concerns. They tend to be very material in the nonprofit sector in a way that sometimes they're not in the corporate world. And so I don't want to skip over or minimize those things because they are quite legitimate. At the same time, I have folks saying, well, hey, if you're worried about the environmental impacts of, how you're using AI, you should be far more worried about the hamburger you ate for lunch yesterday. And, so you can go into like all kinds of spirals about how you use AI and where. But I do think not tackling these reservations is absolutely going to hurt innovation in the way that you mentioned. So, and that can be in a quiet way, and that can be in a loud way. And in a quiet way is, the women in your organization, for example, may feel less comfortable using AI for particular things because they know that they're going to be penalized for it in some way. Um, there is, the ethical concerns around, like, how do you do experiments when you're working with a vulnerable population, for example? Like, you have to figure out what are the bounds, where you can use it, where it's okay. Like, maybe it's okay to experiment with AI in donor communications, particularly with donors who, you haven't had a lot of contact with. But it's not okay to experiment with AI in a way that doesn't feel really safe and secure with unprotected youth. Like that's not like that's they're two totally different situations. And that is where coming to some organizational guidelines and principles are really, really important. So what does
Yeah.
values aligned technology implementation look like for you? Where are your red lines? And that, once you've described that, you have a stronger foundation for your staff to continue to experiment and come up with good ideas. And that can make all the difference, I think, in what you get, particularly because as we're seeing, the good ideas are coming from all across the organization. Everyone I talk to who is implementing really cool AI things with nonprofits is saying the best ideas are not coming from the tech team. Like the first thing I do when I go there is say, okay, can I talk to the talent team? Can I talk to the program team? Can I talk to the data team? Like, let's get out of technology implementation because those are not the folks who are coming up with the really genius ideas.
And on the other hand, if I hear you correctly, I guess that the stress point is on the communication, right? It's like, how do we communicate not only the decisions that we are making, but also like where do we use the technology and how does that potentially impact the outcome on the materials that we're reading or especially for the data points that make us take decisions at the board level. So
Yes.
if it's just not a communication gap, but maybe it's I don't know, maybe a governance or behavioral gap.
Yes. Yeah, it is again making I think
I
setting
see a
those principles.
contradiction probably in between what sometimes the governance or the board is trying to understand what the company was or should move to versus of what like what is the strategy that they should be taking, especially on AI.
Yeah. So a contradiction between their goals and how they get there. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying? Or
yeah, right. It's like and I just cannot get out of the space where I'm thinking right now, like if a board receives the package information and then it's clearly indicated, okay, is AI generated, right?
yes.
What is kind of like the unconscious bias that it will generate to the board versus not, right? And so that probably it will hinder, or to the management or the leadership teams to first or not disclose it
Yes.
or do different things. So it's kind of like I see a contradiction
Yeah.
in the possibilities.
Yes. Well, and increasingly, I mean, it's again not just the board, it's your constituents and the people you serve as well, and being upfront and open about what you share and with
And it could
them.
be totally the other way, right? You as
Yeah.
a board member receiving your package, utilizing AI, which by the way we know that it has to be under secure channels because you don't
Yeah.
want to be leaking out your secrets to the world, right? It's then if you advise to the CEO, okay, I use these models to analyze your information and use also these to take this type of decisions. What the CEO will say for or your chairman or
Yeah.
chairperson will say about you as a board member while using AI.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, I think one of the big things we need to take into account as leaders of organizations, if we're in that position, is how are your board members using AI in order to process you? How are your donors using AI in order to process you? How are your funders using AI in order to interpret you and what you're saying to the world? And to some degree, we have to assume at this point that a lot of our interactions, at least, at some points, are going to be AI to AI, you know? So like if you've got an AI generated board packet and then an AI, someone is saying, okay, I've got a board meeting in half an hour. Can you download this and tell me what I need to be paying attention to? That AI to AI thing is a relationship that we need to be thinking about as well. Um, but I think that, the most important thing for, any board or leadership conversation is probably aligning on what's what's important. As I've been saying, like what's important and like where are our red lines? And those conversations can just be really helpful and really really frees the organization and folks to have good conversations. Once we've said, reiterated, this is our mission as an organization, this is how we get here, here's how it might show up in technology, those end up being really, really fruitful conversations that can then, in turn help you clarify the values.
This puts me into a really good set of ideas because, Alethea, one of the ideas that you've been sharing that I find very powerful is when you speak about shift. That technology decisions are no longer just technical decisions; they are also become value or decisions about values. You
Yes.
even compare to something boards really understand, which is a gift acceptance policy in fundraising, where organizations define what kind of capital they are willing to accept based on the alignment for their mission, right? And
Yes.
but when it comes to technology, AI vendors or cloud providers, data systems, most of those organizations they don't have that framework.
Yeah.
What does actually mean to treat technology decisions as value decisions? I'm very curious to hear this from you.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I think this is something everyone can relate to right now on an individual level, because I feel like, we're all forced to make decisions every day. We may not know it, but we are all voting with our feet. We are all
Yeah.
making decisions about who we buy from, and what products we use and how we live our life. So, the good news is everybody has some foundation on which to make this discussion or to have this discussion. But I think organizationally, it's complicated for many nonprofits by the fact that they don't have a lot of resources and the cost of switching is very high for them.
This is something that I find very hard.
Yeah,
Like if you need to choose in between vendors based on their value, not only the value proposition of the product itself, but the
yeah.
values of the company is harder.
It is. It's very difficult. And sometimes we talk about it with folks by saying, imagine you're choosing a partner. Like think about it as if you were choosing a human being who's going to be sitting with you and working every day, because that's basically what you've done here in some ways. I think also this is where having a tech fluent board member or someone who even works at a tech company can be really helpful in having these discussions in the room, because they can help you evaluate vendor and partner choices
Yeah.
from a number of different perspectives. Number one is is just cost, right? So many nonprofits I know get in a relationship with a particular product, and then all of a sudden, 2 years down the line, that product is costing them 10, 20 times what they anticipated. And the full cost of ownership is something that a tech fluent person can really help you negotiate. And I know nonprofits that have saved literally hundreds of thousands of dollars on their budget because someone has been able to help them negotiate that. So, just right there, I think having a tech fluent board member is a really effective move. But they can also, yeah, they can also help you think of it in terms of like where your values are aligned and not. No choice is going to be perfect. But and of course, organizations, companies change what they do all the time. I know several companies who for many years had very strong product donation programs and then overnight turned those off. So, they basically, the cynical way of looking at it is they had built a dependency on their product and then turned it into a revenue stream when, organizations were already bought in. I don't believe that was necessarily the strategy, but, if they get poked at, they can do that. But, that case is possible. But I also think when you've got a tech fluent board member on your board who is helping you think about how to make these vendor decisions, it's important for, the whole tech world, because that person is going to go back to their company and they will have seen these choices in action. They will have seen the deliberations in action, and they will be able to bring that discussion and that knowledge back to their company as they are building out, their business model, as they are building out their marketing model, as they are building out their product. And I just think that cross-sector interaction is so critical to the world we live in.
It's very interesting because one of the other things that you've been pointing out, it's a- or the signal that I believe that is still under discuss is the fact that a lot of the public data and infrastructures in organizations, it's starting to weaken, and that's why I think that what you just pointed out, to have a tech person in your board is so relevant,
Yeah.
especially as these organizations now in NGOs, they need to start strengthening the points of the data sets or the data points that eventually will help construct information for others to understand what is going on in their own industries or in their own parallel organizations or segments sectors.
Yeah.
um, for many organizations, especially, I guess that in social impact, that data is foundational. And how do they design the programs, or how do they measure success? I wonder what is your take on what happens when that layer is starting to erode. Where data
Mm.
is maybe not completely trusted, and how boards can start putting, a little bit of the finger in there, in how their NGOs or their nonprofits are managing the data. What
Mm.
do you have an idea on this? What have you thought about this?
Yeah, this is a really important topic that I think we don't important and under recognized. We don't spend enough time on this. And there's a few things I'd highlight. Number one is a lot of organizations do rely on large public data sets
Yeah.
for their impact, right? And so, I've spoken about this before. Some of those data sets are becoming less reliable, or they are going away altogether. Or they're becoming, in some ways proprietary to the technology companies that we all depend on, right? And so, what does it mean when LLMs have access to data that a nonprofit, trying to eradicate education gaps in the U.S. doesn't have? That's something real to think about. But for boards, what they can actually do is a couple of things. Number one, you want to know what data you have and where it is going. So that's really important. Just for trust for you and your organization, for you and the people that you serve. And that's something that we recommend many organizations think about, is putting out a statement about or at least having messaging around what data they have and they collect and how they use it and who they share it with, because that can help build trust in a really important way. Number two, we hear a lot more. There are kind of these waves. There are always these waves of nonprofits should collaborate more and nonprofits should merge more. Well, this is an instance where collaboration really could be very powerful. I heard someone say yesterday that, this is a moment where nonprofits need to consider taking down their IP concerns and like all rallying together in a particular issue area, for example. Very risky and not something that we would ever ask a for-profit company to do. But given the extreme nature of the challenges we're facing, might be something that we should consider. Can all of the nonprofits working in food insecurity, globally, across the country in a particular area, can we figure out a way to safely share data, for example? And I think that's a really important area of
Like
collaboration.
a sandbox where NGOs basically kind of put securely their data, and then build like an alternate or parallel universe for data, given that
Yes.
the current organizations and institutions might not be completely reliable on the information that they're sharing.
Yes, yes, and in order to fill in the gaps left by the vacancy of government data, for example, which in many cases is going to go away. But we don't have to ask nonprofits to figure that out on their own, because there are a number of important national and international efforts to help that. One is called the Better Deal for Data. And they are all about basically data security and transparency about how data is being used. There's a couple other data preservation organizations that I think are really interesting, that boards should know about. Maybe this isn't something that you participate in with your organization, but sector-wide collaboration can be one of the ways we can, hack our way out of this right now, I think, and show some solidarity. So I would recommend people look into those data preservation and collaborative data efforts for sure.
And And do you think actually there's maybe an opportunity, a window of opportunity for those activists or founders that are looking into maybe collaborating or creating or fortifying that ecosystem of data, of truth data? Because the way that I see it is that it's kind of like, are we creating like two scenarios where the truth is, which one is the reality? I don't know. I wonder if there's this opportunity for those organizations that are auditing the data of government, or that vacuum data that exists, to really project it. If we look into maybe 5 years from now, do you think that's an opportunity that some organizations could enter into?
To be sort of the data repository in a particular issue area,
Or validation that the data that is the right data.
Yes, yes, and that's a really excellent point. And that's another thought about boards and leadership right now is it's becoming even more important, I think, to have real insight into folks who are most proximate to the problem. So ideally, boards are going to diversify from here on out because it's important to have a voice at the table who can really speak to the particular challenges that you are trying to solve. And so that is not necessarily a technical way of validating the data, but it's important to keep those voices at the table in a way that maybe it might not have been before. A totally different way of looking at that is I just was talking to someone I know who does a lot of training um, on building products, and he's all about product management and intelligent product design, and he was saying, he's for years, this is, a little old school, but for years he's been talking about the difference between, an agile and a lean approach and a waterfall approach. And
Yeah.
in a waterfall approach where you just like build, 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 the risk really grows because you go so far on building a product before you test it that the risks just get enormous because you haven't been testing and addressing those risks as you go. Whereas when you build lean, you're like, okay, let's build something really small and then test it, and build something really small and then test it. And what he was saying that I thought was really insightful was, with AI, the cost of building something has gotten dramatically lower, right?
Yeah.
Like, we can all go out and hack our way to a website that does intake for social services. Like, you could build that this afternoon, right?
Yes.
So the cost of building has gone way down. And I think sometimes that is luring us into sort of a false complacency about how it's working. Because we're like, oh, it's great, we should just build it and launch it. But really, it's actually heightening the need for us to do testing and validation a little bit earlier. So I think, again, to
We're
bring that back.
bypassing it, you mean? It's like we're
Yeah.
bypassing that testing period that we used to have, that we need to
Yes.
have in order, like, to you test, you rate, you iterate, and then it's kind of like repeat, right? It's
Yes.
that circle of lean. Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. And we've sort of edited that out because we're all like in our own little silos, like building things really fast. So I think if we can just inject some of that like testing and feedback into what we do, it's going to be really helpful. And boards need to be involved in that because they need to see that testing loop. They need to see that it's happened. They need to see that the organization is not going to just magically arrive at AI generated, AI powered solutions, but that there are some starts and stops to get there.
I got it. I got it. So, well, we've looked on what is happening today, that what I call like the illusion of adoption, that friction, right? And then the contradictions that the system is already giving us. And what I would like to do is to maybe step a little bit forward with our lens, if we exercise a little bit our foresight today. I would like us to do an exercise, Alethea, where we're going to look into 4 major trends where you believe that it will define how organizations operate. And I'm thinking that we can think of a trend in each of maybe technology, a trend in work and society, and maybe systems. So we can pick up those signals on what is happening today and if the especially for the changes that maybe looking forward to 5 years from now, but that we need to implement today. Are you ready that we can start doing this?
Oof. This is it. This is not a small, this, this is not a hard one, but I mean, not an easy one, but I'm ready to go.
Right. So yeah, well, let's where are we? We know that those signals that we can pick up and that are going to make that difference 5 years from now across. Let's go to think what is maybe a first signal that you see in technology that is happening right now.
A first signal that I see in technology. So what I would call out actually is that I think experiential learning is the only way to actually develop AI judgments and decision making. And I think so. And so I'm saying again, I'm going to the leadership over the actual technology, right? So we're finding we have all these tools. We are flooded in tools. There is, you can go to there is an AI for that.com and find there's, an AI for anything. And what we're seeing is it's, and how you use it and you implement it, that is the real difference. So in technology, it's becoming less about the tool because AI can generate, AI tools until the cows come home. But it's in the human figuring out how to use it that I think is really really critical. And what we're seeing is experience is really the only way to do that and develop that judgment. And so, we spend a lot of time working with companies, putting their tech leaders on boards or engaging them in board level conversations. So, hey, this nonprofit is having this issue, or they're thinking about this use case for AI. How would you approach that? What would be your concerns and so on? How would you guide their board and their executive director on this? And the companies are really excited about that for a number of reasons. I mean, number one, of course, they're excited about the social impact, and this is a way to get their employees involved in something that feels really vital. But number two, they're engaging in conversations that are like very material and very real in a way that AI training just doesn't get at. You can sit here and you can watch all the YouTube videos you want and get very technically skilled, but that's a very different thing from being able to say, should we do this? Not can we, but should we? And so that's what I would name as one tech trend that I think is really important right now. Folks are realizing that AI decision making is far more critical and difficult to build than AI leadership is far more critical and difficult to build than AI tools.
And if we pick up another trend, then more related about the type of work, and then maybe we can do a zoom into boards, right? What do you see that the organizations that you're helping to get board seats in filled in are requiring more? What type of work does these board members need to do, or what type of profiles?
So who do you need on the board and able to do in order to do this?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Well, we've moved from talking, when we started, which was just a couple years ago, we really focused on getting folks in tech roles onto boards. So, CISO, CIO, CTO, VP product types. Not necessarily that level, but in that bucket. And increasingly, we are seeing a demand on the nonprofit side for what we call tech fluent folks. So people who come from tech companies or have, shepherded a digital transformation in marketing and operations and finance and people systems. These are folks who have a very specific how in mind and have really, are not technologists, but have used technology in some really powerful ways. And so they're able to give insights to nonprofits on that particular functional area. So many nonprofits I talk to say, well, I'm not really sure how I would use a VP of product, but oh man, do I know how I would use a CMO with digital marketing expertise, absolutely bring that on. It's really making sense to nonprofits in a way that, just technology as a topic didn't always. So that's number one. I mean, I think the range of folks who can be really useful in a tech forward way for nonprofits has expanded because technology has become part of all of our jobs in a way that it didn't before. But you know, after saying that, I would also say the folks who are useful are the same folks who have always been useful on boards. And those are people who come in with curiosity, who come in with passion, who come in with real interest, who want to say, okay, what does what I know, what does it have to say in this particular context? And how can I support that? And those are the folks that I just get so energized by connecting with good missions because they are going to do amazing things there.
This is great. And I love what you guys are doing. It's actually very, very cool. Another trend that I would love us to pick up is on how the institutions or the organizations are are using their boards. You know, how do you think that are being governed right now? Is there any trend that you see that, or that at least you wish that they will probably implement today to be better in the next 5 years?
So, what should organizations be doing in governance to be better in the next 5 years? Um, well, there's some, it depends on where the organization is, of course.
But
So there,
not only what they should be doing, maybe what you see that some of the top of the liners, the better performers are doing, that this can serve as a pickup signal or a trend where other organizations can see, this is happening. This is they're doing this differently.
yeah, that's great. Um, Well, I think, one thing is just simply starting for many nonprofits, just starting making sure you have a tech or an AI committee, or even just making sure that these topics are on your agenda. It's a standing item. It's not something that comes up, off and on. That sounds really obvious, but for many organizations, that is not yet the case. So that's a sort of easy breezy best practice because when it's on your agenda, you talk about it, the board is more involved, they feel more responsible for getting skilled up on it. And that can be, all the difference. Number two, I'd say, adopting a shared learning posture. So many times board members come in feeling like, oh man, I'm here to give my expertise. I have to have a strong opinion and like lots of deep expertise in a particular area in order to weigh in there. But it's really important that right now, I think we all acknowledge we are all learning. Some of us are learning faster than others, and others may be closer to certain solutions than others. But we're all learning, and that's okay. So sometimes even I've seen some like shared staff board learning agendas that are really interesting. That help put people in the same room, right? So they're using the same language. And that can be super helpful as well. Third, I'd say this is an opportunity. The AI is kind of, sometimes we talk about AI as a mirror. It's showing us who we really are. I often think of it as a like a wedge in the door because the topic of AI has made so many things immediately relevant and pressing that were really important before, but we just weren't talking about them. Like how does our technology use inform our values and vice versa? And so boards that are unafraid to look at the mission of the organization and say, what do we mean
Hmm.
in today's world? Those are the ones that in 2 years are going to be light years ahead because they've dealt with those hard questions, those existential questions, as people are fond of saying. Not just should we be using AI to generate marketing materials faster?
Yeah, yeah, I see that happening. And our last trend, Alethea, what I probably would like us to see is what do you see in the systems in probably the area of just the nonprofit area? Whether you believe that is there any trend that we can think about that? You know, is either we spoke about technology, we spoke about the way we work, we spoke about the actual institutions. I don't know, it's the society. Yeah. Is there something in there? Any other trend that you believe that we can pick up?
Well, I think, there's a couple things that come to mind. One is, I do think that, the figuring out what AI means on the institutional level is really, really important. So in many cases, I think institutions are behind where individuals are. So lots of people are experimenting. They're coming up with really creative uses for AI. This is true within any organization. And the institutional models and the governance models and the norms have not caught up to that yet. And so we need to think about that seriously. And that's, what that means to systems is, for example, in the nonprofit sector, funders are really critical to what gets built. Funders, like what gets funded is what happens. We all know that, despite, nonprofits may push for X, Y, or Z, um, or Tech for Good leaders may push for X, Y, or Z. So funders really need to understand and do like a really deep learning dive right now about AI, what it means to their operations, what it can mean in the issue areas they support, so that we can build the institutional models that support this individual experimentation and creativity. And that isn't, that is not going to be easy. Um, I think that funding is critical. I'd also say just the structure and the way organizations operate is going to change so radically right now. So, I read an interview with the CEO of McKinsey, and he was asked he said, when somebody asks me how many employees I have, I now say I have 60,000, 40,000 humans and 20,000 agents. And so what does that mean to managing an institution? What does that mean to a nonprofit? That's something that we really have to get creative around and bring some imagination to. So we're doing a salon series this summer in 3 cities in the US about what does a board need to look like now to support a nonprofit? Because boards were built to govern a nonprofit from 30 years ago.
Yes.
That nonprofit no longer exists. We all have employee and agent, we have humans and technology employees right now. We have a totally different funding situation. We have a totally different speed of operations, totally different risk landscape and appetite. And so what do our governance models need to look like in order to support that, I think, is a really huge question.
And going to this huge question, then I would love us to then do a fast forward and then think about the future. Let's say that we're 2050 and that we're going to think about the world that you dream, how do we want it to be? So in that case, what do you expect? Like if we get everything right, how would you like a board of a nonprofit? Let's start from what do you think of a nonprofit in 2050? How is different than how do you wish it to be?
Yeah. Um, well, number one, I'd say the perception of nonprofits would be different. And I think that's really critical. Um, no matter what they're doing, we too often think of nonprofits as constantly behind and not as creative. And, I talk to many people, as many people I talk to in the or in the corporate world who are excited to engage with nonprofits. I talk to just as many who are saying, oh, I could never work at a nonprofit. It would be too slow, or, they can't do it. And I have to say, having spent much of my life managing nonprofits, I can tell you they are the most creative and most innovative business cases and solutions that I've seen anywhere. So I would definitely dream of a world where we recognize that and, frankly, use that to our advantage and say, what can we learn from nonprofits rather than just what can nonprofits learn from the way the corporate world works? And I think that would say a lot to, how we had started to resource them. I'd say, a second thing would be that really consequential AI decisions, like data and, who gets credit and who gets healthcare and who gets education, it is going to be in some way like really materially informed by the humans who are affected by that. And I think nonprofits are the best possible way to do that. I do talk to companies who are excited about the work that we do with them because they get, I'm going to use this term, they get market insights, not always in a sort of, extractive way, but these are insights into communities and customers that they would not otherwise have had. And so I think, ensuring that we have that visibility into real legitimate communities is really important. I'll give you one example that's a complete parallel. I worked with an organization that home delivered um, meals to people living with serious illness in, all areas of New York City. And there were some, I would reach out to big companies who did deliveries to get insights from them about how they did their routing and how they did their deliveries. And in many cases, these super smart folks who I was talking to said, you deliver to places we don't have routes. And they were learning from us. And I think that's, that should be happening more and more for us.
I love this. And if we think about again in a dream, how do you think that in 2050 the board of a nonprofit should look like?
I think that, so first of all, number one, I think that in 2050, I would love that like every single professional in the US aspired to be on a nonprofit board and thought it was also, within their capability to do that. The sector would be entirely changed. I also, I believe strongly in the concept of a national service here. I think getting folks involved in that would be amazing. The second best, or maybe parallel, would be like board service for all. Make that something that people really want to do because it keeps them connected to the community in a really, in a really robust way.
So you give me here two dreams. One is that by 2050, a service mandatory role in nonprofits should be if you want to be a VP or a C level, let's going to put in a suite, a C level suite, you needed to be at least in a service role as a nonprofit. Is that like a dream?
Nonprofit government, like absolutely a dream. Yes. I mean, I think our society would be utterly changed if we were able to do that. And to continue with board service, again, if people thought it was not just a responsibility, but an opportunity for them.
Yeah.
And saw a way to do that.
It is an opportunity, Alethea.
Oh yeah.
I do work with nonprofits and it's major changing, the way that that the outcomes brings joy is incredible.
That outcomes bring joy is a very good phrase.
It do. Okay, so then on our third dream, let's going to think about the people. What do you think the what is the composition of that board member ideally? And do you see how technology would interact in that board?
Let's see.
It's a dream 2050. It's already there.
It is. It's a dream. We're already there. Well, I'm glad we're not there quite yet. I think there's some problems we have to solve on the way. But so
I'm going to ask you for both because you don't only obviously you are very involved with nonprofits, but I would love your dream for board members in 2050 for nonprofit or for profit because you have a good insight on that.
Yeah. Well, I guess number one, if I'm going to answer that from, for profit and nonprofit, I would absolutely say that, diversity has to be a piece of that. I think this is an opportunity to bring folks onto boards who have not historically been on, been overrepresented on boards before. So I think that's something we should always be thinking about. Number one. Number two, I'm really struck by that McKinsey quote, I've got, I've got technology and I've got humans. And so I wonder what that looks like on boards. Do we have, an AI board member? I don't know. But maybe that's something that, could be really helpful to folks.
Would you like it? Would you like to have an AI board member by 2050?
I don't know yet. I'd like to experiment a little bit more with that. How about that? I think actually the thing that I really love to experiment with though is, cross-organization collaboration. So when I talk to anyone leading a board, any kind of board, for profit or nonprofit, they, without exception, say to me that their most effective board members are those who serve on other boards. So there's something about the perspective that they bring. I mean, certainly the experience and, just the, their ability to like fit into a board model, but there's something about that perspective and being able to pull out from that particular organization that I think is really valuable. So I think a lot about how to bring the best of board member knowledge without, of course, anything that puts the organization at risk or, puts their IP at risk, but how can we learn from one another? That's particularly critical in the social sector, but I think could be really interesting in for-profit as well.
I love it. Okay, when my last or your last dream, 2050, I'm gonna give you free range in there. What is 2050 and what are
Ooh.
you doing or what is your legacy? What happened to Board.Dev? Tell me.
I love this question, and it's not something I think about often enough, right? We have enough challenges directly in front of us. I do think, my dream for the world is that in 2050 we have resolved a lot of the climate issues that are facing us right now, and I think technology is both critical to that and, of course, driving some of those climate challenges. So I think those are problems we need to deal with, and I would love personally to be more, more involved in that. But my particular vision for my life is, I think of myself as fuel for change makers. So I want to make sure that everyone who has a dream and a vision has, the expertise and the capacity and the tools that they need to achieve that vision. So again, if we go back to, it's not just about boards, but I love connecting folks with great ideas to people with missions that really matter. And so if I've continued to do that, and have done that for a couple missions that really matter. I'm lucky enough to work with hundreds of nonprofits a year. That will be an incredibly satisfying thing.
I like this. And I would like to probably bring back this to the individual level where we navigate all this. And because everything we've discussed ultimately comes down to how we show up, how do we lead in this new environment. So I'm going to ask you a few quick questions so we can get a little bit to know you a little bit better. Is that right?
Sure.
What was your best advice?
Ooh, my best advice.
What is the best advice you ever received?
I think follow good people. Was one. I was never someone who had sort of plotted out my career very systematically, and I know many people who had. And the some of the best advice I heard was, look, like you don't have to have it all figured out, but if you've got the right people around you, then you're going to be doing some interesting things. And that has absolutely worked. I've been so fortunate in my life to work with folks with big visions and good ideas. So I would say to anyone, just find the good people and stand next to them.
That's a good advice. So if you were able to go back when you were 18 and you find yourself, what type of advice would you give to yourself
Mm.
that you haven't
Um,
probably done that you wish somebody would tell you?
Yeah. Something that I've been sitting with, well, two things. I'll give you two answers. I'll give you a bonus.
Okay.
Number one is two things that I've been sitting with recently. One is action is the only antidote to despair, which, sounds a little bit grim in the moment, but there's a lot of scary things happening in the world right now. And I think too often, earlier in my life, 18 certainly, I was kind of stymied and, worried about setting out on a particular path. Just like do something. Do something and those clouds are going to clear. You're going to see if you do something, you'll be in a different position and you will see some different perspective. And like I would absolutely say that to me. The second thing I would say is someone asked, I was at a, wonderful dinner party early in the year, and somebody had asked about, what was your resolution for this year? And I don't, I sort of do resolutions all the time. So my, my beginning of year resolution, I'm like, well, it doesn't, I don't know. It's more like my April resolution. But the thing that came to mind is the phrase burn your boats, which is around, which is from the Trojan War. And they landed and so that no one would think that they had another way out, they burned their boats. So like they were on the shore, they had to, they had to win. That was it. Yeah, you had to win or like there's no going home. And I'm trying to push myself to do that more these days. Like go ahead, take a position that is very risky. Do something from which you cannot turn back. I've been all about preserving optionality in my life in some ways, and I might look back at my 18-year-old self and say, hey, just do something that requires commitment and see where that takes you.
I love that advice. Really, really, really cool. You have really good two pieces of advice for yourself. And I'm hoping that
I'm a
somebody
lot.
else
I
understands
tell
the same.
myself a lot. Yeah.
So if you find to be a board leader, and let's gonna be intentional about a female board leader because I believe that this year, and we didn't speak too much about it, but I believe that the number of board leaders positions for female is not necessarily increasing. Um, what would you give an advice for that woman that is looking to fill into a board seat?
Hmm.
What is a piece of advice for her?
Well, number one, congratulations. You're exactly where you should be. We need you there and you're going to be awesome in that seat. Number two, I would say have as many conversations with as many board members as you can. Do that. I was, just talking with a very experienced board member the other day who's a founder. He has founded and exited several companies. He has made pitch after pitch, and has also sat on very many nonprofit boards. And he said, what I want to do is the body of knowledge that is what you can't get on Google. He said, I work with a lot of folks who are first-time board members and have really not sat in this board seat before. And, I don't need to be telling them about how to read a financial statement, right? Like this is something that they can Google or they can Claude and they can figure it out. He said there are things about sitting in a boardroom about what happens when there's a disagreement, but you can't really tell who's on what side. What happens when the board seems to be kind of ganging up on the ED and you actually don't agree? Like there are all of these things that are not, easily apparent or written about that go unsaid that are really critical to sitting on a board. And that you only get from talking to other folks. And we're building a huge body of knowledge on this that I'm going to be excited to share with folks at some point. But I think that's the best first step you could take as a board member is just learn more about what's not said.
And what is that skill that you believe that every leader serving in a nonprofit board should have?
Uh, I would go back again to curiosity.
Mhm.
And that is a skill. Like it's very difficult to sit in a seat again where you're supposed to be in a position of authority and you need to bring your expertise and bring your decision making capabilities, but also stay curious. That's very, very, it's sometimes very difficult to do. But that is the thing, even in moments of stress or moments of confusion, that is going to help you see the right path forward.
I like this. Is there anything that you believe that people are maybe it's a belief about the future um, that people believe on boards or nonprofits that it might be a misconstruct? What do they
Ooh.
get wrong?
What do they get wrong about being on boards at nonprofits? Yeah.
Mm,
I mean, I would go back to this perception that nonprofits are necessarily slow or behind.
mm-hmm.
That is not, I mean, in some cases it is true. In some cases it's true and it's intentional, right? So, in some cases nonprofits should move a little bit slower than for-profits because the stakes are higher in human terms. Um, but it's not necessarily slower because they're not good at things. I would say the second thing is, um, the business problems are genuinely interesting and, genuinely complex, and you're absolutely going to learn something from them. The business models and what it takes to execute in a world where, your buyer and the person you serve are different, right? Like you've got a funder paying for services. How do you keep both of those happy? How do you deliver in a place where, standard delivery services don't go? Like these business problems themselves are really curious and captivating. And for most business leaders, I know that ends up being one of the most important things for them in their service.
I love this. Alethea has been such a very rich conversation. And if I probably have to take maybe three takeaways of our conversation today, my very first one will be that AI adoption is not necessarily what it seems. There's a gap between adoption and real integration, where that's a big risk. That's
Yeah.
one takeaway that I guess everybody needs to start looking at. My second takeaway is there's a friction, that there's a friction on AI and how it's not about just accelerating work, but also it's changing how we judge people. And I want to put that as an awareness because it means that adopting AI is not just a technical shift, but it's also a leadership challenge. You spoke about a lot about it's not only about technology, it's also about leadership. And my third takeaway is that the decisions that we are making in the board is not only about tech, but it's also about values. Is how
Yeah.
do we integrate vendors and companies that we want to work with that eventually walk in the same path that we want to walk with. Did I get it right? Is there anything else that you believe that I'm leaving behind?
You did an excellent job summarizing. I love all of those. I would say, I don't know whether this is a new one, but yeah, the bottleneck in AI isn't the tech, it's really the decision-making layer. Um, and I guess data as values got that. Yeah, the one thing I'd say too is that in today's moment, the best ideas aren't necessarily coming from the tech team. They're coming from across
Oh,
the organization. So that's a big shift for all of us.
yes, yes. I really like this. Thank you so much for this conversation, Alethea. Not just the work that you're doing is amazing, but also you're been helping us how to think more clearly about what this moment actually requires from leaders, from uh, social leaders, from people in boards. So thank you very much for this conversation.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a really great conversation.
And for you that are watching us today in the Tech4sight podcast, remember that this is a good challenge to have. We have a great challenge of building powerful technology that we're building also organizations, we're building systems and leaders. And if this conversation have meant something to you, please share it. Share it with someone that you believe that is going to enjoy it. We'll see you soon. Stay tuned and stay foresighted.